The sky over Ryler 9 burned with fire, a crimson inferno stretching across the horizon as the invaders descended. In the span of a single hour, the human colony's proud defenses had crumbled. Cities once bustling with life now lay in ruins, the ground stained with the blood of soldiers and civilians alike. The warlords of Zarkon had arrived, and they were not leaving until every last trace of humanity was erased. Captain Elias Kane stood at the front lines, watching the destruction unfold through the shattered remains of the colony's central command. His fingers tightened around the grip of his rifle, but even he knew it was futile. The alien ships, massive warships, their hulls gleaming in the chaos, hovered ominously above the city. Their engines roared as they released wave after wave of terrifying assault craft, while legions of invaders, armed with weapons far beyond humanity's capabilities, stormed the surface. He could hear the screams of his comrades, the cries of children, people he had sworn to protect, being torn apart by the overwhelming might of their invaders. The warlords' forces had no mercy, and there would be no retreat. Ryler 9 was lost. Elias, a voice called from behind, sharp and urgent. It was Lieutenant Dahlia, one of the few survivors from the first wave of defenders. Her face was smeared with dirt and blood, her uniform ragged, but her eyes burned with the same fire as always. "We have to fall back. We can't win this." Kane shook his head, his gaze never leaving the devastation. "We don't have time to fall back. There's no place left to go. They'll level this entire planet if we let them." Dahlia clenched her jaw, but Kane could see the doubt creeping into her expression. They were soldiers, trained to fight, trained to win. But this was different. The invaders were too powerful, too ruthless. And their leader, Zarkon, had a reputation that preceded him. A tyrant who had conquered countless worlds. His warlords were feared across the galaxy for their brutality and technological superiority. There was no defeating them, not in a traditional sense. Not without something extraordinary. As if in answer to his unspoken thought, a sudden, chilling silence fell over the battlefield. The ground beneath them trembled, and then, from the depths of the chaos, a figure emerged. Clad in black armor, with a black mask obscuring his face, the man stood alone against the oncoming horde. His movements were swift, deliberate, an unstoppable force. The invaders paused, momentarily thrown off balance by the appearance of this new figure. Kane watched in stunned disbelief as the masked man moved with precision, his bladed weapons slicing through alien soldiers like they were paper. He didn't hesitate, didn't falter, as if the violence of the world had no hold over him. "Who is that?" Dahlia whispered, her voice trembling with awe and fear. Kane couldn't take his eyes off the figure, even as explosions rocked the ground around him. "I don't know, but he's not one of us." His pulse quickened, a mixture of hope and dread swelling in his chest. The man in the mask was cutting through the invaders like they were nothing more than obstacles. But the question remained. Was he a friend? Or just another player in a game far bigger than them? Before Kane could react, the masked figure locked eyes with him for the briefest moment. A cold, unfeeling stare that pierced through the chaos. Then, without a word, he disappeared back into the shadows. The battlefield erupted back into violence, but something had shifted. The invaders hesitated, their focus splintering as the masked man vanished. For the first time since the invasion began, Kane felt something akin to hope. But it wasn't enough. The warlords would never leave Ryler 9 alive, and neither would they. Not unless the man in the mask had more to offer than just spectacle. "We need to get to the command center," Kane snapped, his voice hardening with resolve. "If that man can do what I think he's doing, we need him on our side." Dahlia nodded quickly, her fear giving way to the burning desire for survival. They had nothing left to lose. As they sprinted toward the heart of the battle, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary human. He was something else entirely. A legend. Or a nightmare. Either way, they would have to find him. For the sake of Ryler 9, and for the sake of humanity, they had to. And they would stop at nothing to uncover the truth behind the man in the mask. The air was thick with the stench of smoke and desperation. Ryla 9, once a thriving colony of human ingenuity and hope, now lay in the grip of alien invaders. The capital city, Solara, had been reduced to rubble, its grand structures nothing more than crumbling skeletons. The survivors, those fortunate enough to escape the initial onslaught, were herded into makeshift camps, shackled by chains both physical and mental. Captain Elias Kane and Lieutenant Dahlia moved silently through the shadows of what remained of Solara's once proud streets. The dust and ash clung to their skin, but they weren't focused on that. The destruction was everywhere, yet their eyes remained sharp, constantly scanning for any signs of movement, any hint of danger. "We've lost," Dahlia murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Look at them, look at us. How can we win now?" Kane didn't answer immediately. He knew the weight of her words. The invaders, the warlords led by Zarkon, were everywhere. Their forces, formidable and relentless, controlled the entire planet. And the human resistance? It was broken, slaughtered or scattered to the winds. Their ability to retaliate had been all but destroyed. The resistance's last hope lay not in weapons or strategy, but in something far more dangerous: the masked man. The figure had appeared out of nowhere, an enigma in the midst of chaos. He was not a soldier or a general. He was something else entirely. The man in the mask had killed dozens of the invaders without a single word. But now, as the reality of their situation set in, Kane couldn't help but wonder if even he could turn the tide. They reached an abandoned building, a former shelter for high-ranking officials before the invasion. Inside, a group of human survivors had gathered, their faces weary, but their resolve hardened. They looked up as Kane and Dahlia entered, their expressions a mix of hope and fear. "Captain," a gruff voice greeted them. It belonged to Marcus, a former officer in the colony's defense forces, now a leader of the resistance. He stood beside a map of the colony, which had been scribbled on with hastily drawn lines and markers. "We've got nothing left. No way to fight back." Kane ignored the map, his eyes scanning the room. "The man in the mask, he's still out there, right?" His voice was low, yet there was a commanding tone beneath it. Marcus hesitated, clearly conflicted. "We've heard rumors. But that's all they are, rumors. We don't even know if he's one of us. He could be someone else." "Someone else." Kane's eyes narrowed. "Like Zarkon's men?" "No, not like them," Marcus replied quickly, as if the thought itself was an insult. "But we don't know his goals. He's killed dozens of invaders, yes, but for all we know, he's doing it for his own reasons. He could be a mercenary or someone with an agenda we don't understand." Dahlia stepped forward, her voice firm. "We don't have the luxury of questioning him right now. He's the only one who's made any impact. The invaders are too strong. If he can hold them back, even for a little while, it could give us the opening we need to strike." Kane nodded. "Exactly. We need him, whatever he is. If he's fighting for us, he's the only chance we've got left." Marcus rubbed his temple, clearly exhausted. "You're right. But we need a plan. Just charging in isn't going to work. The invaders know we're here, and they're closing in." Kane's mind raced. He couldn't afford to waste time. The resistance was fractured, their resources stretched thin, but he knew that if they were to have any hope of pushing back, they had to unite under a common cause. "We'll find him," Kane said finally, his voice like steel. "We don't have the luxury of waiting for him to come to us. We'll track him down, bring him into the fold, and then we'll hit the invaders hard. We can't afford to let them regroup. Not now." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, but Kane could see the doubt in their eyes. They had seen too much loss, too much failure. The warlords had crushed them at every turn. Yet here, in the silence of that ruined building, something flickered, a faint, fragile spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to push them forward. The masked man was out there, and whether he was a hero or a threat didn't matter. He was their only chance. As Kane prepared to leave the building, Dahlia placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression unreadable. "Do you think he's human?" Kane paused, looking at her with the faintest trace of uncertainty. "I don't know. But we'll find out soon enough." Outside, the streets were even more desolate than before. The alien patrols were still active, moving in coordinated units, hunting for any remnants of resistance. Kane and his group kept to the shadows, moving swiftly, with a single objective: find the man in the mask. As they moved deeper into the wreckage of Solara, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Warlords might control the planet, but the man in the mask, whoever he was a reminder that not all was lost. And if they were lucky, he would lead them into the fight of their lives. The night was alive with the crackle of gunfire and the thundering footsteps of alien warlords. As Kane and his group navigated the crumbling streets of Solara, the unmistakable sound of battle echoed through the ruined city. But it wasn't the resistance forces fighting back, it was the masked man. Kane's pulse quickened. The masked figure had struck again, this time taking down an entire squad of Zarkon's enforcers in a flurry of swift, lethal movements. From the shadows, they watched as the invaders' patrol, confident and brutal, was shattered with surgical precision. "Is that him?" Dahlia whispered, eyes wide in disbelief. Kane didn't answer. He couldn't look away. The man in the mask moved like a shadow, his every step calculated, every strike deadly. There was no hesitation in his actions, just pure, unrelenting efficiency. The alien soldiers stood no chance. It was like watching a predator hunt. The masked figure dispatched the last of the patrol with brutal efficiency, his weapon, some kind of energy blade, cutting through armor and flesh like they were nothing. He didn't take pleasure in the violence, but he embraced it with a chilling sense of purpose. As the final soldier collapsed to the ground, the man in the mask vanished into the night, leaving no trace behind. "He's incredible," Dahlia breathed, a mix of awe and fear in her voice. Kane's gaze hardened. "Incredible doesn't win wars. We need him to join us." They waited, tense and alert, hoping for any sign of movement, any indication of where the masked man had gone. But he was gone as quickly as he had come. "Where do we start looking?" Marcus asked, the doubt still evident in his voice. Kane's answer was simple. "We don't look for him. We wait for him to find us." The masked man wasn't a soldier in the traditional sense. He didn't work with the resistance, didn't follow the usual chain of command. And yet, his actions were precisely what the human forces needed. Kane knew that aligning themselves with him could turn the tide of the war, or destroy them entirely. Over the next few days, as the warlords continued to tighten their grip on the planet, Kane's group followed the trail of destruction the masked figure left behind. Each strike, each ambush, revealed something more. The man was methodical, driven by something personal. His targets weren't random. They were the warlords' commanders and their elite forces. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for revenge. And it was working. The aliens were rattled. They hadn't expected this kind of resistance. It wasn't just the usual guerrilla tactics. They had never seen anything like the masked man before. "He's moving too fast," Marcus remarked one evening, studying a new report. "Every time we try to close in, he's already gone. It's like he's always one step ahead." Kane leaned over the table, eyes fixed on the map of Solara. The masked man's movements had been unpredictable, but they were starting to form a pattern. Kane didn't believe in coincidence, especially not when it came to something as deadly as this. The masked man had to be deliberate. "We'll catch him," Kane said, his voice low. "We just need to be patient." That night, they finally got their chance. A broadcast crackled over the Resistance's makeshift communication network. A signal they hadn't sent. A message they hadn't made. It was simple, direct, and chilling. "Meet me at the ruins of the old council hall. Midnight." The message was unmistakable. The masked man was reaching out. And Kane knew that this was their opportunity. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a challenge. "We move at midnight," Kane ordered, his voice firm with resolve. This could be our only shot. At the stroke of midnight, the group made their way to the council hall, a once proud building now reduced to skeletal remains. As they approached, they saw him, standing alone among the ruins, his black mask gleaming faintly in the moonlight. For a moment, no one spoke. Kane took a step forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. The man in the mask was an enigma, an unknown quantity, but the presence he commanded was undeniable. "You wanted to meet," Kane said, his voice steady, though his heart raced. "We need your help." The masked man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped aside, revealing a group of alien soldiers bound and unconscious at his feet. "I'm not here for your resistance," the man finally spoke, his voice low and cold. "I'm here to end this. And I will, but only if you're willing to follow my lead." Kane stared at him, trying to read the face behind the mask. This wasn't a hero. This was something far more dangerous. And yet, at that moment, Kane knew they had no choice. If they were to have any hope of saving Ryle 9 and the human race, they would have to follow the masked man wherever he led. "Lead the way," Kane said, his voice resolute. And with that, the real war began. The hum of a distant engine was the only sound that broke the silence. Kane and his group crouched low, watching as the masked figure approached a heavily guarded alien outpost. The night was thick with tension, and every instinct told Kane that this wasn't just another raid. The man in the mask had a purpose, and it wasn't just about taking down a few invaders. Kane's heart pounded in his chest. He's going in alone. The masked figure didn't pause, didn't hesitate. He moved with the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly what he was doing. His black armor blended with the shadows, and he disappeared into the heart of the alien compound without a sound. Kane could feel the weight of the moment. Whatever was about to happen, it was bigger than anything they'd faced so far. "You sure about this?" Dahlia asked, her voice tight. She was the last person to second-guess the masked man, but there was something in her voice that betrayed her concern. Kane nodded, his eyes still locked on the compound. "We need answers, and he's the only one who can get them." Minutes dragged by. The group watched in silence, tense and alert. Then, without warning, explosions ripped through the compound, shaking the ground beneath them. The lights flickered, and the alien patrols scrambled in every direction. "What the hell is he doing?" Marcus muttered. Before Kane could respond, a shadow moved at the edge of his vision. The masked figure appeared again, walking out of the chaos with the ease of someone who had just shattered an entire enemy force. He was dragging something behind him, a body, heavy and lifeless. The group moved forward, not needing any further instruction. They caught up with the masked man just outside the compound's perimeter. "You did it," Dahlia breathed as she surveyed the carnage. "You actually did it." The man in the mask didn't acknowledge her. Instead, he dropped the body at Kane's feet. It was one of Zarkon's generals. Kane knelt beside the body, his eyes scanning the alien's uniform. The general had been responsible for the deaths of hundreds, if not thousands, of humans on this planet. Now, he was nothing more than a corpse at their feet. "The information we need is inside his head," the masked man said, his voice as cold as the grave. "I've already set the signal for extraction. We'll learn everything in the next few minutes." Kane looked up sharply. "What do you mean extraction?" The masked figure didn't elaborate. Instead, he turned and disappeared back into the shadows, leaving Kane to stare down at the alien officer's body. He had no idea how the masked man had done it, how he had infiltrated the outpost and eliminated the general so quickly, but there was no time to question it now. They needed to act fast. "Help me," Kane said to Marcus. "We need to get this to our base, now." Marcus nodded, his face grim. "What exactly are we hoping to find?" Kane didn't answer immediately. He didn't know if the information would be useful, but he had a sinking feeling that whatever they uncovered would change everything. As they moved the body, an explosion suddenly rocked the air, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Kane froze, every muscle in his body tensing. They had been too slow. Zarkon's reinforcements were here. Without a word, the group bolted, dragging the body behind them. The masked man had given them a chance. Now they had to take it. They ducked into an alleyway, barely evading the incoming fire from the alien forces. Kane's mind raced. They couldn't outrun them, not like this. The streets were too narrow, too exposed. But the masked figure was already there. Without a word, he reappeared out of nowhere, a ghost in the darkness. He moved with deadly grace, taking out the advancing alien soldiers one by one. It was as if he was everywhere at once, disappearing and reappearing without warning. The invaders didn't know what hit them. Kane watched, his heart pounding. The masked man was a weapon, an unstoppable force. But there was something about the way he fought that left a chill crawling down Kane's spine. This wasn't just a soldier. This was something darker, something more dangerous. As the last alien soldier fell, the masked figure turned and walked back toward them. "Move," he ordered. "You're not safe here." Kane hesitated, staring at the man in the mask. "What are you?" The figure didn't answer. He simply turned and began to walk, disappearing into the night, leaving Kane with more questions than ever before. But there was one thing Kane was sure of. They were not alone in this fight anymore. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just a survivor. He was something else entirely. And he was about to show them what it really meant to fight. The ground shook as another blast rang out, sending shockwaves through the air. Kane's grip tightened on his weapon as the earth beneath him rumbled again. The Warlords were coming. Zarkon's forces had discovered their hideout. Nothing was safe anymore. "They'll be here in minutes," Marcus said, his voice tight with urgency. "We can't outrun them." Kane scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowing. The masked figure had led them here, to an abandoned military complex deep in the wastelands outside Solara. But now it felt like a death trap. The hum of enemy transports filled the air. They were surrounded. "Can we fight?" Dahlia asked, her voice strained but determined. "We'll have to," Kane replied, his mind racing. The plan had been simple. Hold the line, gather any remaining survivors, and wait for reinforcements. But reinforcements weren't coming, and the masked man had just disappeared again. A scream echoed from the entrance of the complex. Kane's head snapped toward the sound. Alien soldiers poured through the breach, weapons drawn, their alien tongues snarling as they advanced. There was no more hiding, no more waiting. "We're out of time," Marcus shouted, firing his rifle at the incoming forces. "Everyone move." Kane didn't hesitate. He sprinted to the makeshift barricades, rallying the survivors. "This is it. Fight like your lives depend on it, because they do." As the first wave of alien soldiers advanced, the masked figure emerged from the shadows, his silhouette cutting through the smoke and chaos. Without a word, he charged into the fray, his blade flashing in the dim light. He moved like a phantom, precise and deadly, taking down enemy after enemy with cold efficiency. But even with his skills, the alien forces were overwhelming. The survivors fought back fiercely, but Kane could see the fear in their eyes. They knew this was the end. They had no hope of winning, not against a force this powerful. But they fought anyway. And then, just when it seemed like the invaders would overwhelm them, something changed. A deafening roar shook the ground as a massive warship appeared overhead, blocking out the stars. It was Zarkon's flagship, its dark silhouette casting a shadow over the battlefield. The Warlords were making their final push. They weren't just here to conquer. They were here to destroy. The masked man paused, his attention drawn to the ship. Kane watched as the figure's posture shifted, his entire demeanor changing. There was no hesitation now. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something far more personal. "I'll hold them off," the masked man said, his voice low and cold. "You get to the control room. Take out their communication array. If you do that, you can delay the reinforcements." Kane stared at him, a moment of doubt creeping in. "Are you sure you can hold them off alone?" The masked man didn't answer. Instead, he turned and sprinted toward the flagship, disappearing into the smoke, his black armor a blur of motion. Kane didn't waste another second. He motioned for the group to follow him. "We move now or it's all over." They stormed the control room, fighting their way through the complex, every second feeling like an eternity. The sound of gunfire and explosions reverberated in the corridors, but they kept moving, pushing forward. They couldn't afford to hesitate. Finally, they reached the central command center. Kane didn't waste time on caution. He smashed the door open, and they burst into the room, only to find it already swarming with alien soldiers. Kane's pulse raced as he engaged them, firing his rifle without thinking. Dahlia and Marcus followed his lead, clearing the area with brutal efficiency. It took only moments to reach the communication array, and with a few well-placed shots, the alien technology went dark. For a fleeting second, the battle around them seemed to pause. The reinforcements wouldn't arrive now. But it wasn't enough. The flagship was still in the air. The Warlords still had control of the planet. "Let's go," Kane shouted, pulling them toward the exit. "We need to get out of here, before." A massive explosion cut him off. The ground trembled as the entire facility seemed to shake apart. The flagship had begun its descent, and it was coming straight for them. Kane didn't stop. He pushed forward, pulling Dahlia and Marcus with him. The masked figure had already made his move. Now, it was their turn. The complex was falling apart around them, but Kane knew they had to act fast. They had one chance to make a difference. They had to survive this, and somehow they had to end it. The masked man's fight wasn't over, and neither was theirs. The battle for Ryler 9 wasn't just about fighting the Warlords. It was about taking back everything they had lost. And Kane would be damned if he let it end here. The sky above Ryler 9 was aflame. The flagship, Zarkon's massive warship, had begun its descent toward the planet's surface, its engines burning through the atmosphere like a falling star. Explosions echoed across the battlefield as the ground shook beneath Kane's feet. It wasn't just a warship crashing. It was the death of everything they had fought for. "We need to move. Now," Kane shouted, pulling Marcus and Dahlia through the crumbling ruins of the military complex. The shockwaves from the descent rattled the earth, sending dust and debris swirling in every direction. The building around them groaned, its walls buckling under the pressure. There was no time to waste. The masked man was already gone. Kane had no idea where he had gone or how he planned to stop the warship, but if there was anyone who could do it, it was him. "We're not going to make it," Dahlia muttered, her voice tinged with fear. The look in her eyes mirrored the one Kane had seen in the eyes of every soldier who'd been forced to watch their world burn. But he wasn't going to let them fall here, not while there was still breath in his body. "Keep moving," Kane barked. "We're not done yet. Not until we make sure they pay for this." Ahead, the wreckage of the once imposing command tower loomed. They had to get to the center of the complex. The only way to stop Zarkon now was to take out the flagship's command center, a final strike against the heart of the invaders' empire. But the path was blocked. Alien forces had poured in from every side, their soldiers everywhere, their ships filling the sky. The odds were impossible, yet Kane felt a grim sense of resolve in his bones. They had come this far. They had bled for this moment. Now it was time to finish what they'd started. "They'll be expecting us," Marcus said, his eyes scanning the incoming threat. "We need a diversion." Kane's mind raced. A diversion. The masked man had done his part. It was time for them to do theirs. "Dahlia," Kane said, his voice urgent, "can you get to the control panel? I need you to activate the self-destruct sequence on this complex. Give us an opening." Dahlia didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the control room, firing her weapon at the approaching invaders as she went. Kane and Marcus followed close behind, providing cover as they pushed through the smoke and chaos. They reached the control room moments later, and Kane could see Dahlia already working on the terminal, her hands moving quickly across the console. Her face was set, determination etched into every line of her features. "It's ready," she said, her voice steady despite the madness around them. "But it's going to take a minute to fully engage." "Then we'll hold them off for that minute," Kane replied, taking up position beside the door. Marcus nodded, his weapon raised. The alien soldiers were closing in fast, but they weren't going to give up without a fight. The first wave hit them with a deafening roar, and the battle erupted in full force. Kane's rifle barked, taking down one enemy after another, while Marcus and Dahlia held the line. Every shot felt like a struggle for their lives. But this was no longer just about survival. This was about vengeance. And in the chaos, Kane finally caught a glimpse of him, the masked man, moving through the smoke like a shadow. He was back. He had returned to finish the fight. Kane's heart clenched with a surge of hope. The masked figure didn't hesitate. He moved with brutal precision, cutting down the invaders in a blur of motion. His blade flashed, each strike as deadly as the last, and the alien soldiers began to falter. They hadn't expected him to return. None of them had. In that moment, Kane knew they had a chance. The masked man wasn't just a fighter. He was a force of nature. "Dahlia, are we close?" Kane yelled over the roar of gunfire. She glanced over, sweat streaking her face, but her eyes were focused. Almost there. Kane didn't wait. He turned back to the fight, his rifle blazing as the final wave of invaders charged toward them. The masked man moved with him, his movements a blur, cutting through the enemy lines with ease. Finally, Dahlia shouted, "It's done. The complex is set to blow." Kane didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Marcus by the arm and pulled him toward the exit, running as fast as he could. The entire building trembled as the countdown began. The alien forces were in disarray, but they weren't giving up. Kane could hear their roars of fury as they realized they had been outmaneuvered. They reached the entrance just as the first explosion ripped through the complex, sending shockwaves through the earth. The Warlords' command center was gone. Ryler 9 was still in ruins, but the invaders had been dealt a blow they would never recover from. Kane stopped and looked back. The masked figure stood among the ruins, his silhouette barely visible in the smoke. For a moment, their eyes met, two warriors, bound by the same cause. And in that moment, Kane knew one thing. The war was far from over. But with the man in the mask by their side, they had a chance. A new dawn was rising, and humanity was ready to fight back.